Welcome to the Power Factor Show.
The bandwidth for this episode of the Power Factor Show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network, firearmsradio.tv.
Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgson Powders, and JPL Precision.
Oh, hey, no, that wasn't a personal walkthrough. No, I was just kind of hanging out here on the range for a while. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about preparation for the start signal. We've had episodes about unload and show clear, how to do a table start, and then we've just talked a little bit about kind of preparation and how to handle the moment when the timer goes off. But we haven't really talked too much about what you're thinking or what you're doing in the moment between, or moments, let's call it, between are you ready and stand by and when the beeper goes off. Now the rules after you've received the stand by command, well, you're not going to get the are you ready command, I don't think, until you're in the start position. So if the start position is standing, what do they say now, naturally erect, hands relaxed at sides, they're not going to start you until you're in that position. But where you're going to go or what you're going to do after you get the start signal can have an effect on what you're going to do for that 1 or 2 or 3 seconds. Now after you receive the stand by command, you absolutely cannot move. You'll get a penalty for creeping if, for instance, the start position were standing with your hands at sides, and while you're waiting for the buzzer to go off after the standby, sometimes you'll see people, especially if the RO or SO allows the full 2 or 3 or 4 seconds to elapse, people will kind of start to go like this in anticipation of the timer going off, and you can't do that. You've got to remain in the start position. They should not start you. You shouldn't get a start signal if you're not in that start position. Now let's say if I were going to engage a target that was immediately in front of me, I would square myself up to the target just like I was going to shoot a bill drill or something and just be ready to draw right to that target. I think Steve in an earlier episode talked about if you have 2 targets, one which is pretty natural in terms of how you're going to stand while you engage it, and one that requires a big twist, you're probably better off to, if you're not falling afoul of a requirement that you're facing directly uprange or facing directly downrange, get your body positioned for that more difficult shot. So if I had a target that was directly in front of me and another target that was back here over my shoulder, if I could, I would probably start like this, because it's easier to transition like this than it is to start like this and then have to reposition yourself to get this target. You don't have to reposition your legs or anything. If you're already positioned towards this target, then you can draw to this one and make the quick transition over here. Now, another consideration is, what if after the start signal goes off, you're not going to shoot, you're going to move? A lot of times what I'll do is actually get my weight going in the direction that I'm going to go. And so I'm essentially, my toes are like this, holding me back, so that when the signal goes off, I'm just going to fall in that direction. If you're standing back on your heels when the timer goes off, you have to kind of gather yourself up and get going this way. So if you anticipate going this way, get your body, it can't be an exaggerated lean, because of course you still have to maintain this naturally erect posture. You can't get down like this, like you're going to jump off the start line at the 50-meter dash. You've still got to be upright, but you can lean out quite a little bit and have your weight already going in this direction, so that as soon as the buzzer goes off, you can just head that way. Another consideration, if you're, let's say, at a table start where you've got the gun on the table in front of you, where is your focus? Is it on the gun or is it on the target? Because your first act when the timer goes off, if it's an empty gun start, is to get that gun loaded. After it's loaded, then you concern yourself with the target. So generally what I'll do is I'll sit down and initially have my focus on the target. So during the as I'm sitting there kind of waiting for the "Are you ready?" command, I'll sit down. I will have placed my gun on the table, but I'll be looking at the target. And then on the stand by command, I'll shift my focus down to the gun. And so I will have had that mental image of where the target is kind of burned into my mind, so that when I go to grab the gun and load it, I'll have only been distracted from that image of the target just momentarily. So I'll get the gun loaded, put it on the table. Let's say the start position is hands on the table. I have my head up looking at the target. So are you ready? Stand by, beep, get the gun up, and then the target is still right there where I left it 2 seconds ago. I sort of liken a little bit of the mental preparation to, I know we talked about the basketball pivot in the cover episode, but again, basketball, if you ever have watched, especially skilled, practiced players in a basketball game shooting free throws, it's a similar situation of coming to the line, getting yourself ready, and a lot of the time you'll see players go through a certain series of motions that they go through every time they shoot a free throw. They're trying to be absolutely consistent. So it's not just a matter of how they hold the ball, how they bring the ball up, and how they release it. They'll put their feet in a certain position, not just relative to each other, but relative to the line. Oftentimes you'll see the shooter go through a little drill, or the shooter, yeah, in this case they're a shooter, basketball shooter. They'll dribble the ball 3 times. Then they shoot, or they dribble it twice, hold it, dribble it twice more. But it's this preparation that they go through, and I try to do a little bit of that. I don't try to make it quite that involved. You'll see some shooters, especially I notice on hands up starts, they'll assume the start position, and then just about as I'm ready to give them the "Are you ready?" command, they'll want to do this. And then just as this hand comes up and I'm, okay, one more. You know, and then when I think, okay, now they're ready. Are you ready? Stand by. And a lot of shooters will have just this little drill that they go through. I mean, the gun is always going to be right here, but still, just this is the motion you're going to do right after the buzzer goes off. So if you get to the start position and do this a couple of times, it's not a bad idea. But don't get, I mean, I've seen, you know, the guy who loads his gun, checks the chamber, takes the mag out, puts a new mag in, checks the chamber again, and because now he's done 2 chamber checks, maybe it's out of battery, so he hits the back of the slide, you know, and they go, and it gets a little too involved, I think. You know, load the gun, get it ready to go. I think I'm distracted by doing that much stuff prior to the start signal. I'm going to get the gun loaded back in the holster and get ready. Take 2 or 3 or 5 seconds, but sometimes this 10 or 15 second preparation, I think, is sometimes just kind of a waste of time and a distraction from what you're actually trying to do. So come up with something that's repeatable, something that's comfortable, something that gives you confidence, like checking the chamber. I can tell, usually when I load my gun and rack the slide, I can tell if it's picked up a round or not. I can tell by the sound of it. Even somebody else's gun, I can tell if it's picked up a round. So I don't check the chamber. I think you can adversely affect the gun by, instead of, now that you've let the slide run forward and chambered around, now you poke it out of battery to check it. Now you've got to go through this process of making sure it's in battery again. So I think bring the gun out, load it, rack the slide. On a gun like a 1911, if the gun is out of battery, the safety won't engage. So if you've loaded it, rack the slide and flip the safety up, and the safety goes up, the gun's ready to shoot. It's loaded, you know. So don't waste a lot of time. I consider wasting a lot of time. But be focused, be mindful of what you're going to do when the timer goes off, and be prepared for that initial act, whether it's moving or shooting.
Hey Power Factor fans, I'm Larry, and here's a quick tip for you. Hopefully this is going to be a pretty short segment we can tack on another episode. I'm going to talk about fire extinguishers. We mentioned in my my reloading bench episode that I keep a fire extinguisher at each end of my loading bench, and you've seen fire extinguishers on John Larson's loading bench. It's a thing I highly recommend you have just in your house in general, but also especially at the loading bench where you've got gunpowder being handled. So these are 2 fire extinguishers I keep at each end of my bench. You'll notice that they look very similar, but there's some differences that you're going to want to notice. First of all, they're the same brand, this Kitty brand. But one thing you notice about this one here on your right is that it's got a plastic handle and a plastic, you know, kind of valve body, I guess is what it's called. Whereas this one's got a metal. This is constructed out of metal. The handle's metal. It's got a better safety pin. This one had a plastic pin that's kind of broken. I just took it out for right now. But so the difference on these two is that once they're used, this one's junk. This one can be recharged because it's got a metal valve and neck to it. So that's one thing that you want to notice about these two fire extinguishers. They both have a gauge on them that tell us if there's enough pressure inside. And this one is at the top of the range. There's a little green range you can see there. This one here is, as I recall, is right at the bottom end of its range. So this one is something that I might just have to replace sometime. Because like I said, this plastic type one cannot be recharged. There is some maintenance that you have to do with these things and you might not realize. So these are dry chemical ABC fire extinguishers. When you see ABC, that is it's a general type fire extinguisher, and ABC stands, well, a good way to remember it is A is for ash. So anything that burns and leaves ashes like paper or wood, it's good for that. B is for boiling, is a good way to remember that. So liquid type fires like grease fires and oil fires, it's good for that. C is for current, so electrical fires. If you've got an electrical fire, this works for that too. So this is a general purpose ABC fire extinguisher. There's also other types as well, but this handles most of all the household type fires you might encounter. But there are maintenance requirements. Now, like I said, this is a dry chemical, and what that is, there's a powder inside there. You've got a gas charge that propels the powder out the nozzle, but you also have a this dry chemical powder that's in there. And after a long time, that powder consolidates at the bottom through just gravity and through vibration. Like, you know, I've got it attached to my bench, so if I'm banging on, you know, a gun trying to get the sights out of it, or if just from general reloading and there's just vibrations going on, that's condensing the powder in here. And right now, I can feel that the powder inside here is consolidated at the bottom. And what you will feel, if it's correct, when everything's working right, you'll feel the powder. It just came loose. You'll feel the powder ravel down inside. And if you don't feel that, then you need to do some maintenance on it. And I'll show you how to do that. So what you do is you take your trusty rubber mallet, and basically you just want to get that stuff loose inside and tip it upside down. Hit it right here on the round portion. Hit it up here where the powder's consolidated at the bottom, and just kind of vibrate it loose basically. And just like that. And eventually you'll work it loose to where you feel the dry chemical inside move as one big chunk at a time. You'll feel it go ka-chunk at the bottom, and then back to the bottom and back to the top. And you just want to get that broken up to where you can feel that it's loose inside. And you'll feel it. You'll know what I'm talking about when you feel that. But if you don't do that, and there's a fire, and you have to grab this in emergency, and all that dry chemicals is compressed at the bottom, well then the compressed gas inside cannot propel it out of the nozzle. It's just going to sit there at the bottom. So what you'll do is you get your fire extinguisher out, and you'll just get this little squirt, and then nothing. You just get some gas come out, but the dry chemical's not coming out, and you don't have your firefighting capabilities. So there's just a quick tip for you. Hopefully that comes in handy. If you have fire extinguishers, check them, check the gauges frequently, and check that dry chemical is loose inside there. And if you don't have fire extinguishers, get some. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Hey everybody, this is Steve. Welcome to Power Factor. This week's tip, we're going to talk about something called a pre-shot routine as it pertains to shotgunning. So the similar analogy in pistol shooting is at the make ready command. What a lot of the top level shooters will do at that point is to they've already programmed the stage, but it's kind of like their last set of instructions to themselves. They'll go through, they'll air gun, the various targets all from within the box, especially like the first probably sequence of targets, maybe the first position they may go to, or maybe one or two positions, or in some cases, if it's a reasonably short stage, they'll literally go through the whole entire thing. But the idea there is that you're kind of going through and visualizing what you want yourself to see as you're going through and doing it. You're setting up that little movie that we've talked about before, and going through the process and just kind of showing yourself one last time about what you want to do. Pre-shot routine in shotgunning is very similar, but the pre-shot routine actually also has extra meaning, or has actually extra benefit. In shotgunning, you really want to let the subconscious take control of the shooting and let all of the shooting happen there. The problem is that when the conscious mind gets involved, that you start looking for things, you start trying to make things happen. And when you start shooting from a conscious perspective, typically you will end up missing targets. So what happens is that the pre-shot routine is kind of the step that you go through where I'm going to call it transfer responsibility from the conscious mind to the subconscious. You're effectively calming or shutting up, if you will, the conscious mind and letting the subconscious take control. Gil Ash's book, You Gotta Be Out of Your Mind, has good information on a pre-shot routine. The one thing I really like about this particular book is that it takes you kind of beyond the fundamentals. Similar to Brian Enos's book, Practical Shooting Beyond the Fundamentals, this book takes you beyond the fundamentals of just shooting, and it starts getting into a lot of the mental side of things, visualization, pre-shot routine, feel, dealing with pressure, things of that nature. So pre-shot routine is really kind of something that's personal to everybody. Everybody will have their own pre-shot routine. It needs to be consistent. You need to do it from shot to shot, not just on the first target that you go into a stage. You need to do it for every shot. It needs to have a certain rhythm. You want to kind of, have your pre-shot routine in terms of duration or time be consistent each time you go and execute it. And it needs to be short and sweet, but to the point, cover just exactly what you need to do. So I'm going to start out from the position in discussion of pre-shot routine. I'll tell you what I go through and what I do. But in terms of a pre-shot routine, I'm making the assumption that you've already decided where your break point is, where your hold point is, where your look point is. You've already done all that homework, you know where all these things are. And you usually do that by watching the show pair, whether you're the first shooter or following the first shooter or whatever. You've had a chance to see their birds, so you've got a clear idea of where you want to break the targets. You know the distance that you're going to be breaking the target. You've estimated the speed. You've estimated the lead that's necessary in advance. So at this point, all you need to do is execute the shot. So what I do in terms of a pre-shot routine is, as I step into the cage, the first thing I do is tell myself basically how many feet of lead or whatever it is. I effectively remind myself of how many feet of lead the target's going to take. So let's say that I've already determined that it's 3 feet of lead or whatever the case is, and it's a quartering away. So I'll say to myself 3 feet to the right or 3 feet to the left or whatever the case is. The next thing I'll do is to visualize that. I'll visualize that 3 feet of lead on the let's say from the standpoint of you've got a pair of targets. So again, when I'm talking about determine the lead, you determine the lead in the first target, and you've also determined the lead in the second target. So I do kind of a visualization process. I go and I visualize the gun moving a distance, say 3 feet in front of the target, and breaking that first target in the first break point. Then I will visualize shifting my eyes, picking up the second target, visualizing whatever lead that I determined for that second target and the position of the gun relative to that second target, visualize that target then also breaking, and then I will go back and visualize the first combination again of the first target that's being thrown. It's very important, we'll get into this in a minute here, why you want to focus, you have your last focus on the first thing that you're going to see. So after I go off and I do that visualization process, I will then step into the cage and I will mount the gun. I will load 2 shells, close the action, mount the gun, and I will mount it into the very first break point, to make sure that I'm not binding or doing anything there, because again, this is the first chance that I've gotten of mounting the gun in the position where my feet are at. So I'm now kind of checking my feet position. So I mount the gun to the first break point, I move, I mount the gun to the second break point to make sure that I'm not binding up, and then again I go back and I mount it to the first break point. Now the reason that you want to always end on the first place that you're starting at is that your subconscious mind kind of works on a last in first out principle. The last thing that you put into your conscious visualization bank is the first thing that your subconscious is going to look for. So in terms of the visualization exercise that I did, I visualized the first point, I visualized the second point, and I came back and I visualized the first point again. In terms of mounting the gun, I mount the gun to the first point, I mount the gun to the second point, I come back, I mount it again to the first point. So my subconscious now basically has the first point of visualization of what I plan on seeing, of mounting the gun in front of the bird and the necessary lead. And it also knows of where I'm going to mount the gun on the very first bird that comes out. At that point, I will then drop the gun into my hold position that I'm using for this particular pair, and I will bring my eyes back to my look point, and at that point I literally have a very soft but wide open focus where my eyes are not moving, and I literally at that point relax my mind or flush my mind of conscious thought. And that is effectively what is the trigger or the handoff when I go from being a conscious shooter thinking through all this stuff to literally just switching over, basically handing the baton off to the subconscious and letting the subconscious execute the shot from that standpoint. And then I call for the bird and I break it. I break the first one, I immediately go over to the second one because I already know where it's going to be. In my break point, I break it, and dead pair. The key thing is that from the standpoint or the point that you execute what's called the trigger, and for me the trigger is where I lower the gun, look at the hold point, and relax my vision. You want that period to be no less than, and this is numbers from Gil Ash, he says no less than 1.4 seconds and no more than 2.4 seconds. And the reason for those particular numbers is his feeling that if you call for the bird less than 1.4 seconds from the point that you hit your trigger spot, that you may not have let your vision completely relax and become steady where your eyes may still be moving, or that you have not had enough time to effectively relax your mind or do that handoff from the conscious to the subconscious. Anything more than 2.4 seconds is his feeling is that at that point your subconscious will try to come back into the game. In other words, that it's almost too long, and if you don't do something in that period of time, then the subconscious will sort of kick back in and try to take control. So his point is that if you are longer than 2.4 seconds, you need to speed this up, but you don't want to go anything faster than 1.4 because you're probably not giving yourself enough time. If you get distracted, something happens out of the ordinary that you weren't expecting, it causes your rhythm to go off. It's his recommendation, and I do the same thing, break the gun over and start the whole entire process all over again. Now, yes, it may be frustrating when somebody else is there, but you're going to see a lot of people, a lot of the top shooters are going to be doing probably similar stuff, if not longer, as part of their pre-shot routine. So let's say you do that and you miss a bird for whatever reason. What I will typically do then after missing a bird is I will go and very quickly effectively play the movie back in my head of why I missed it, where I missed it, what I did, what I need to correct. And the correction should be a positive correction. You don't want to say don't do whatever. You want to tell yourself what you should do. So if you were, let's say, in the wrong position of the bird, you want to tell yourself, relative to where you want to be. Let's say it's a quartering target that's dropping and falling, to the left, and you need to be, at 7 o'clock, but let's say you were at the 8 o'clock position on that bird, then tell yourself, 7 o'clock, 3 feet, or whatever the lead is. And in terms of the lead, one thing that I've learned recently is that, I tell myself that it's going to take 3 feet of lead. I tell myself that to primarily from the standpoint that I've mentioned before, that if I don't tell myself in advance or mentally set up that cue to insert the gun in front of the bird, because of so much pistol shooting, I tend to try to put the gun on the bird. So part of that is telling myself, get the gun in front of the bird. But the thing that I've learned is that I don't want to then look for that when I mount the gun. When the bird is thrown, I don't want to consciously look for that 3 feet. I want to let my subconscious take care of it. If I get the gun out in front of the bird, the subconscious will take care of whatever the necessary lead is. But if I tell myself 3 feet and look for 3 feet, or confirm that I'm getting 3 feet, then I start becoming too much barrel aware and not target aware. I don't have a sharp focus on the bird, and that usually results in a miss. So when I do miss a target, I go back and again I tell myself what I need to do. I will then visualize again what I need to do in that as part of the pre-shot routine, and then do it again. And more often than not, the next pair ends up as resulting as a broken pair or dead pair. So if you have any questions, let me know. Throw me an email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com, or join the discussion at facebook.com/powerfactorshow. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.